In 1930, New York City's streets were crowded with nearly 8 million people and policed by men earning less than a janitor's wage. Crime soared, yet complaints vanished into a maze of political favors and silent fear. Entire industries, the docks, construction, even trash collection, fell under invisible control, protected not by law, but by corruption. How did organized crime seize a city while the police looked on, powerless to stop it? The answer begins much earlier than you might think. In the first decades of the 20th century, New York's population swelled faster than any city in America. By 1930, census records counted over 7.7 million people packed into 5 boroughs. Tenements rose in tight rows, filled with families from Sicily, Naples, Poland, and Ireland, each chasing the promise of work or escape from poverty. But the city's basic services struggled to keep up. The New York Police Department, already stretched thin, saw its patrolmen paid just $1,200 a year, a salary that barely covered rent and groceries, let alone the risks of the job. Police rosters from the era show entire precincts responsible for neighborhoods with tens of thousands of residents. Many officers took second jobs or depended on political connections to stay afloat. Payroll ledgers reveal that a janitor in City Hall might earn more than a beat cop walking the Bowery. The city's rapid growth brought new problems: crowded streets, rising crime, and a sense of anonymity that shielded both criminals and their victims. In neighborhoods like Little Italy and the Brooklyn waterfront, poverty and language barriers made it hard for newcomers to trust the police or even report a crime. The NYPD, underfunded and overworked, was forced to make choices about which calls to answer and which to ignore. Reports piled up, unsolved. The sheer scale of unmet need left entire blocks vulnerable. In this environment, the promise of protection could come from anyone willing to offer it, especially if the official channels were out of reach. The city's size, its chaos, and its lack of resources created cracks wide enough for organized crime to slip through, unnoticed and unchecked. Tammany Hall's grip on New York politics ran deeper than any single office or election. For decades, the machine turned city government into a tool for rewarding loyalty and suppressing dissent. Patronage jobs flowed through ward bosses, filling police precincts, sanitation crews, and city agencies with men who owed their livelihoods to Tammany's favor. Appointment ledgers from the 1920s list hundreds of city workers hired not for skill, but for their willingness to deliver votes or keep quiet. This system blurred the line between public duty and private interest. When a crime went unsolved or was not seriously investigated, records often showed the detective in charge had friends in City Hall. In 1926, the city's annual report recorded a sharp rise in unsolved burglaries and assaults. The numbers kept climbing through the decade, even as Tammany-backed politicians promised reform. Behind closed doors, officials traded favors for campaign donations, legal contracts, and silent cooperation. The result was a city where the law bent to the needs of the powerful. ordinary citizens had little hope of protection unless they belonged to the right political club. Those who challenged the system faced retaliation or were simply ignored. Tammany's influence reached into every corner of government, creating an environment where corruption was routine and accountability rare. The machinery of the city served those who greased its wheels, leaving neighborhoods exposed to whoever could fill the vacuum by force or by promise. With enforcement weakened from within, organized crime found a ready-made structure to exploit, setting the stage for a new kind of control that would soon reach far beyond city politics. On the Brooklyn waterfront in the 1930s, a single name dominated the hiring halls: Anthony Tuff. Tony Anastasio was president of the International Longshoremen's Association Local 1814, and Anastasio controlled jobs for thousands of dock workers. Each morning, men lined up at the so-called shape-up, hoping for a day's pay. The list was never random. Payroll ledgers and union logs from the era show that those who refused to cooperate with Anastasio's crew found themselves at the back of the line, or worse, blacklisted entirely. The promise of steady work depended on loyalty, kickbacks, and silence. The docks were only the beginning. By the 1950s, Mafia influence had spread into New York's booming construction industry. Public contracts for bridges, tunnels, and skyscrapers became gold mines. Bid documents and city procurement records reveal a pattern. The same handful of contractors won project after project, their names turning up on so-called cartel lists. Behind closed doors, mob captains and union bosses met to rig bids, set prices, and decide in advance who would win each job. The arrangement was simple: pay a percentage to the right people, and your company could build without interference. Step out of line, and trucks might go missing. Supplies would vanish, or picket lines would appear overnight. Anastasio's methods combined economic pressure with the threat of violence, creating a pipeline that turned labor rackets into steady cash. Dock workers handed over a cut of their wages, and contractors paid for labor peace. These payments fueled a system that reached deep into the city's economy, making the Mafia not just a criminal enterprise, but a shadow regulator of entire industries. The lines between legitimate business and organized crime blurred as the promise of profit kept everyone in check. On Manhattan's West Side, the business of hauling garbage was anything but simple. City records from the 1960s list hundreds of carting companies, but behind the paperwork, a handful of Mafia-backed firms carved the city into invisible zones. Each neighborhood belonged to a different crew, and every business inside those lines faced a choice: pay the fee or risk being left with rotting trash and broken windows. The logic was clear in the ledgers. Carting contracts were padded 25% above market rates, and those extra dollars flowed straight to the families who controlled the routes. Municipal carting licenses, issued by city officials, rarely changed hands without a quiet sit-down. When a business changed owners, so did the obligation to the local crew. License transfer files from the Department of Sanitation show a pattern. New owners signed on with the same carting company at the same inflated price. Fee schedules circulated among trade associations, listing set rates for each block, and any attempt to negotiate a better deal brought a swift reminder of who really ran the streets. For many shopkeepers, the math was simple. Paying the monopoly fee guaranteed regular pickups and peace of mind. Refusing meant trucks stopped coming and complaints to City Hall disappeared into a maze of bureaucracy. The official system offered no protection from sabotage or threats. It offered only the promise of more trouble if you stepped outside the lines. Carding companies became institutional fronts, their paperwork in order, their true allegiance hidden in the margins. In this world, protection was not just a threat. It was a service woven into the cost of doing business in New York. Cash moved quietly through police precincts, courthouses, and city offices. The Knapp Commission, convened in 1970, recorded officers describing a system where envelopes of money, known as the pad, passed from gamblers, racketeers, and mob fixers to patrolmen and detectives. For some, the pad added hundreds of dollars each month to a meager salary. Internal affairs files from the period show that officers who played along were rarely disciplined. Promotions sometimes followed silence, not service. In 1971, commission transcripts named over 100 officers who received regular payments from criminal enterprises. The money bought more than just blind eyes. It secured warnings about raids, lost evidence, and dropped charges. Bribery did not stop at the police. Court records from the 1950s and the 1960s reveal that judges and prosecutors sometimes accepted gifts or campaign donations in exchange for leniency. The result was a legal system where indictments evaporated before reaching trial. In racketeering cases, fewer than 10% of witnesses agreed to testify. Fear shaped every decision. Retired detectives, speaking decades later, recalled entire investigations collapsing because no one would speak on record. The Mafia's own code enforced this silence. In 1963, Joseph Valachi, the first insider to testify publicly, explained to the Senate, "You don't talk, or you're dead." His words echoed the reality of omerta, the law of silence that bound members and terrified outsiders. Even victims hesitated to report threats or violence, knowing the cost of breaking ranks. The streets learned quickly that justice could be bought, and that speaking out carried its own sentence. In this environment, the machinery of law protected those who paid, while the rest were left to fend for themselves. Inside police headquarters, the chain of command looked impressive on paper. Commissioners, deputy chiefs, borough commanders, precinct captains. But the reality was a patchwork of fiefdoms. Each borough ran its own investigations, guarded its own files, and rarely shared intelligence. Patrolmen in the Bronx might never hear about a pattern of break-ins in Brooklyn, even if the same crew was responsible. Specialized units, like the transit police and the housing police, operated with their own leadership, their own priorities, and little incentive to coordinate with city detectives. Internal memos from the 1940s and 1950s show repeated calls for better information sharing, but the silos held firm. This fragmentation left the NYPD chasing shadows. When a string of robberies hit Manhattan's Garment District, detectives logged them as isolated thefts, not as part of a larger racket. Reports sat in separate filing cabinets, never cross-referenced, never connected. Even as rumors of syndicate meetings and cross-borough alliances swirled, most officers saw only the piece in front of them. The limits of this approach became undeniable on November 14, 1957. In the small town of Appalachian, New York, state troopers stumbled onto a gathering at the home of Joseph Barbara. More than 60 men, many of them known to law enforcement as racketeers, fled into the woods or were rounded up outside. The list of names read like a directory of organized crime. Vito Genovese, Carlo Gambino, Joseph Bonanno. Local police and the FBI scrambled to explain why so many powerful figures had assembled in secret. The NYPD, caught flat-footed, had little to offer. Internal reports from the days after Appalachian reveal confusion and embarrassment. The event shattered the illusion that organized crime was a local problem. It was a national network in scope, hiding in plain sight while city agencies looked the other way. The fallout forced a reckoning. Law enforcement could no longer afford to treat rackets as isolated events. The old structure, divided, territorial, and slow to adapt, had left the city blind to the scale of what was happening. New investigative tools would be needed, but for now, the system's flaws kept the real power brokers out of reach. Layers of deniability shielded the Mafia's influence from law enforcement for decades. Genuine business fronts, trusted intermediaries, and corrupt officials formed a hidden architecture that kept bosses insulated and evidence just out of reach. On paper, companies like waste haulers, construction firms, and shipping agencies appeared legitimate, their ownership records clean, their contracts in order. Behind the scenes, these entities funneled money and information between street-level operations and the highest ranks of organized crime. Associates, never made members, handled the dirtiest jobs, ensuring that those who gave the orders rarely appeared in a police report or a courtroom transcript. Even within the police force, these boundaries blurred. In the 1980s, detectives Louis Eppolito and Stephen Caracappa, both decorated NYPD veterans, secretly worked for the Lucchese family. For $4,000 a month, they leaked confidential files, tracked targets, and arranged murders, all while maintaining their badges and pensions. Their handler, Bert Kaplan, acted as a buffer, delivering cash and instructions so no direct link could be traced back to the family leadership. Internal affairs files would later reveal that complaints about Eppolito's conduct were quietly dismissed, and his family's mafia connections ignored. This compartmentalized system protected not just the bosses, but also the corrupt officials who enabled them. When the FBI sent Joseph D. Pistone undercover as Donnie Brasco in the 1970s, the operation exposed just how deep these layers ran. Over 6 years, Pistone's infiltration of the Bonanno family led to more than 100 convictions. But even then, the bosses themselves remained distant from the crimes. The evidence collected showed a world where orders traveled through whispers, cash moved through shell companies, and violence was outsourced to trusted associates. The Mafia's mastery of buffers and fronts forced prosecutors to rethink how they built cases, setting the stage for new legal strategies that would finally target the system, not just the soldiers. By 1970, the federal government introduced a new weapon, the Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, known as RICO. For decades, prosecutors had struggled to tie mafia bosses to the crimes carried out by their soldiers. RICO changed that equation. Instead of targeting single acts, it allowed prosecutors to charge entire organizations as criminal enterprises, holding leaders responsible for the ongoing conduct of their crews. Internal Justice Department memos from the early years of RICO show how the law was designed to break through the layers of insulation that had protected the five families for generations. The turning point came in 1986 with the so-called commission trial, held in the Southern District of New York. Prosecutors, led by Rudolph Giuliani, assembled a case against the leadership of the Genovese, Gambino, and Lucchese families. Wiretaps, surveillance logs, and testimony from turncoats painted a picture of a tightly managed syndicate. For the first time, the language of the indictment described the Mafia as an ongoing enterprise, a business with rules, structure, and a chain of command. Trial transcripts detail how bosses communicated through coded messages, how money flowed from the street to the top, and how violence was used to enforce discipline without leaving a trace. The verdict was decisive. 9 bosses and top lieutenants were convicted under RICO, receiving sentences that would keep them behind bars for life. Property records from East Harlem and Bensonhurst, once dotted with Mafia-controlled businesses, show a rapid reversal in ownership after the trial. The economic grip that had lasted for half a century began to loosen. The commission trial did not end organized crime in New York, but it dismantled the system that had made the Mafia untouchable. For the first time, the law reached the top, and the city's shadow government started to unravel. Organized crime thrives when power hides in plain sight, and accountability dissolves behind closed doors. Even now, corruption and silence can still undermine the systems meant to protect us. The legacy of unchecked influence lingers, reminding us that vigilance must never fade. Every city has shadows. What matters is how fiercely we choose to confront them. Thank you for watching. Share your perspective below.